This brings us to the protists section of this particular video lesson. Protists. Protists are very interesting organisms. If you are a plant, you have a very specific description. You're able to undergo photosynthesis, and you have chloroplast, and you're able to produce, sugar, most plants. If you're an animal, we haven't got to them yet, very specific definition. Fungus, we looked at just recently. Bacteria, archaeobacteria, very specific definition. If you are a eukaryotic cell, a eukaryotic organism, and you do not fit in the animal, fungus, or plant kingdoms, then we throw you into protists. So this is kind of like the garbage kingdom. It's the kingdom where if you don't fit anywhere else, you get put in here. So who are these protists? What are these protists? On the screen, I'm showing you this phenomena. It's called the red tide. It's called a harmful algal bloom. And these red tides, they are typically seasonal, and they often are associated with a lot of fertilizer being released into the farm country and draining off into the ocean or something like that, or pollution, nitrate pollution. And so the algae in the water will reproduce like crazy. The same way your plants like the fertilizer and your crops like the fertilizer, there's certain algae that love this fertilizer as well, and they start reproducing and reproducing. And some of these algae in the water produce a toxin. If you were to swim in it, for the most part, as long as that's swimming with your mouth open, who does that in the sea anyway, it's not an issue. But there are many animals, like this one here. Do you know what this is? Any idea? It is a type of shellfish, which is also very misleading because a shellfish is not a fish. It is a mollusk. So the shellfish, some of them will eat these algae, and so they'll bioaccumulate this poison in their tissue. Sometimes the bioaccumulation of the poison in their tissues is not in a high enough concentration to affect them. But if you were a human eating a whole bunch of these mussels, clams, or whatever, then you could biomagnify, there's another word you heard before, the poison into our tissue and end up with paralytic shellfish poisoning. These animals here, beluga, whale, which swim in St. Lawrence River, so they're local, they have been known to eat some of these, and some of their pods have mysteriously died. Well, not mysteriously, have died because of the poisoning associated with eating this their food, which is biomagnified the poison. And so you've talked about this already in grade 9 ecosystems and ecology, and so here's another example in grade 11 biology. And what's interesting about this is the increase that's happened when we talk about another human impact. Because of the pollution that we dump everywhere, sadly, we have seen, and the warming planet, we've seen a huge increase. So this is like a 10-year difference. You'll notice that there were these red tides all around North America. This is the United States, and there's different types of these. And within 10 years, you can see the number increased dramatically. And this is not just around the US, which I have in that graphic there. It also, not just the ocean, it also happens in our lakes as well. So in the Great Lakes, especially Lake Erie, which is a very shallow lake, so it's not able to dilute a lot of these pollutants as easily as some of the other Great Lakes, we've seen these harmful algal blooms form, and they've caused huge amounts of damage to the ecosystems. So this is a result of protists. My family lives in Florida, and my family being my mom and my sister. And so if I were to show you kind of where, maps, and I went to North Lauderdale, so they live in South Florida. And North Lauderdale is a suburb of Miami, basically. So there's Miami, there's the south of Florida, and so they live in this area here. And the thing about Florida, which is interesting, is that a lot of it is at sea level. So all throughout Florida is a ton of water because the water comes in. And so the same way that we have roads, if I was able to get right to, my address here, I guess I shouldn't put it on here because it's going to go online. But if I were to go right to my address to where my family lives, you'll notice that in the backyard they have these canals, and these canals help with the distribution of water around the city. and they all ultimately feed. So whatever you put in your lawns will go into these canals, and these canals all feed into this area here. And so in these keys, you've got the ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, and you got this area, and separating this area where a lot of people keep their boats, there's a lot of hotels, a lot of tourism, and here are these locks. And so every once in a while what they do is they open up these locks, and it will allow the flow of all the liquid, all this water coming in from the city out into the ocean. And so one of the things that happens in Florida, this is an annual event, and you get these harmful algal blooms, which is likely exacerbated by the fertilizer and all the pollution, the nitrate pollution coming in from the city out into the ocean. And so this is algae, and this algae is a different color and is releasing a poison that is going to likely biomagnify to the population and do a lot of damage. That's also a problem, right? You might not have heard of this, but you might have heard of something about cats and how if you have them, you can get sick. There's a thing called Toxoplasma gondii, and it is another protist. And Toxoplasma gondii is very interesting. You can get Toxoplasma gondii infections by changing cat litter if a cat is infected by this particular protist. And Toxoplasma, they've done a lot of experiments with this. They found, you'll see a link in the worksheet, and I encourage you to take a look at it. And it talks about how the Toxoplasma, as a mind-controlling parasite, is able to cause the rat to change its behavior. So a rat would normally smell cat pee and run away. But this parasite causes the rat behavior to change in such a way that it's attracted to cat pee. And it will just sit there if a cat or predator comes around, and it makes it much easier for the cat to capture it, and then the parasite that's living in the rat can be transferred to the cat, and so on and so on and so on. So this is not really a concern for humans. You don't have to be afraid of it. I'm going to tell you a lot of things that are unlikely to happen, but it is a parasite that can infect mammals, including humans. And so this CDC graphic here is Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, world source for a lot of different disorders that diseases that affect people. They give us a nice graphic explaining how the Toxoplasma gondii can be transmitted from the cat to other animals, including humans. So I encourage you to watch that video and get a bit more information. So even though humans are not affected, we are seeing that the Toxoplasma is affecting other mammals. And so there was a huge die-off of these particular seals, and these monk seals were hit really hard by the protist, and so it caused them to basically abort their babies, and the population then took a nosedive. So we know that viruses, bacteria, fungi have the ability to go from one animal to another. We call these zoonotic diseases. Rabies is another example. Okay, so this one here, rock snot diatoms, and they get that name because of the characteristic of the coating of the rock or whatever they're covering. It's a slimy material that's very unpleasant. So protists, as I mentioned before, if you don't fit in any other kingdom, you get thrown in the protists. A couple other examples. I'm giving these to you because if you go through the worksheet, you'll see I had a whole bunch of links. So this amoeba and this plasmodium, trypanosoma, these are parasitic protists that cause problems. This one is more just diarrhea and stuff like that. This one here can be more problematic, sleeping sickness. These are diseases caused by protists that we often associate with the vector. So if you get bit by a mosquito, you're like, oh, a mosquito gave me the disease. Yeah, it did, but the mosquito wasn't the organism that caused the disease. It has the disease-causing organism inside of it in many cases. A lot of biting flies carry disease-causing organisms inside of them that they end up injecting in our body. And the tsetse fly with trypanosoma is a classic example. Okay. Another place where protists are really important and we unfortunately see a human impact on this, is they play a symbiotic role with the coral. And the coral are the rainforest of the ocean. This is where you have a huge amount of primary productivity and biodiversity. And the coral, which is an animal, requires the symbiotic relationship within particular protist. And when these protists are in an environment where the temperature warms up slightly, the protist will leave the coral, and the coral will then no longer be this nice brilliant color. They'll go into this color that's white because all the algae is left, all the protists have left. And then if the temperature does not drop in time, then the coral will die. And so here's a human impact. Due to global warming and climate change, our coral reefs are dying. If you take a look and Google up Great Barrier Reef obituary or something like that, the Great Barrier Reef, which has been around for thousands, tens of thousands of years, it's dying and has these mass die-offs that have occurred over the past decade especially that are very concerning. Okay. Here's another graphic that shows a difference between the coral between before bleaching and after bleaching. So this event is called bleaching, where the coral reef gets bleached out. So that gives you some background into the protists. Now, if you go through my PowerPoint, you'll see a lot of resources that assist you with your understanding of the protist kingdom. So I kind of gave you an intro, and now you can go through the rest of this and get a better understanding of protist and use the worksheet to look at what I consider important. One of the things we would have done in class is we would have taken a sample of pond water, and I'll do this on Wild Wednesdays. I did it last Wild Wednesday. These days are super cold. We need several warm days to get some really good diversity in the water. So right now it was 0 today, and yesterday it was lots of snow actually. So with this kind of weather, we're not going to see the same kind of diversity that we normally see in the spring at this time of year. So go through the PowerPoint and get an understanding for the word, get an understanding for the characteristics of protist, what makes a protist. Because it's a garbage kingdom, there's very little that we can say that's common with every single protist. We can say that they're all aquatic. That's the one thing we can say, even though some can live in dry environments for a short period of time. There are some biologists that believe we have a 10-kingdom system, if not more. And the place where the kingdoms get split, where there's controversy, is in the protist. So some scientists will take the protist kingdom and divide it into several different kingdoms. So here's your definition, but it's not really good because they're heterotrophic or autotrophic. They're motile, they're unicellular, but some are not. They're large complex cells, which is true of all the eukaryotic kingdoms, and they can move through the help of several different structures. You should be familiar with pseudopods, cilia, and flagella. Your protists happen to be the ancestral organism, we believe, for plants and animals and fungi. So some major speciation event occurred, and they were able to adapt to environment, become specialized, and become those particular organisms. So protists are among the early organisms on the planet. The protist taxonomy is different than what you're going to see with the fungus, animal, and plants. With those, the taxonomy is very clear. With the protist, because there's such a huge disparity from one to the next, we don't necessarily use the same language. You'll notice I use the language of animal-like, plant-like, and fungus-like because they behave like those particular kingdoms. Okay? So you can go through the next slides here. I'm just going to flip through them because you have the PowerPoint access to them. I encourage you to click on these links. If you want to use these things that say Learn 360, remember you have to log in first and then click on Learn 360, log into BYOD, go into Learn 360, and then click on the link and it will work. But these YouTube videos are more interesting. So I click on that. Amoeba eats paramecium. That's kind of cool. So you'll see one protist eating another, and you'll see the important information in these tables. So just work your way through these and you'll get a better understanding of some of the protists. So I don't need to talk about them. That's just a part of your learning. Okay. Paramecium is a relatively large protist. So these three protists I've shown you, the amoeba, the paramecium, the zooflagellus, they all use different ways to move around. The amoeba, they kind of ooze around the place. The paramecium have these little cilia that allow them, it's like oars on a boat, and there's many of them, and they're able to move super fast. And flagella is like a big giant rudder at the back or a helicopter blade that moves in a circle and allows these organisms to create a current or move quickly as well. Okay? So once again, just go through the PowerPoint, watch the videos. I'm going to go past that. That's a very interesting video, I think. You're going to see a life cycle I've given you of one protist, but there's many, and a couple of additional PowerPoint videos on YouTube that I've picked that I think are good resources for you to look at. Plant-like protists. The green algae was considered a plant-like protist. I just want to emphasize this. It is no longer a plant-like protist. And so when you guys go to that, that map that I asked you to complete, that is a part of the yellow, you'll see that the green, let me just shrink this here. You'll see that the green algae is sitting up here all by itself. I'm asking you to put it in the correct kingdom, in the correct phylum. Where does it fit? It fits somewhere, so I want you to figure that out. It used to be a plant-like protist. It no longer is, because they recognize the certain features of this particular organism that is more similar to plants than it is to algae and protist. So it's been moved. However, you are responsible for knowing some of the others, and you put them on the map. Brown algae, red algae, diatoms, and so on and so on and so on. So these are all very interesting, and if you go through the additional slides, you'll find out more information about the plant-like protists. Okay? So the chlorophyta, no longer in there, but the other ones are. Okay? Fungus-like protist, I normally bring one into the class. They often escape. They're kind of really difficult to keep in the petri dish. They ooze out and they start oozing all over the place. But sadly, you won't get the experience of seeing that this semester. Maybe next year I'll have one with the grade 11s and you guys can come back. Okay. So I encourage you to look at this video as well, get a better understanding of what slime molds are. The careers that are associated with biodiversity, you don't have to be just a field biologist out in the field looking in swamps for different microscopic organisms. There are so many different places that we are incorporating this technology. If you are trying to design a car, well, what do? You look at the environmental world, the natural world, and you find an organism that can move very well and has a lot of space. The box jelly, I can't remember the name of it. Triggerfish, puffinfish. So it's like a puffinfish, and it blows itself up, and it's like this big, really weird looking fish that's able to move very quickly. And so there's a car company that looked at this design of this animal, and they designed a car based on that shape because it's able to move through the water aerodynamically, so they figure it can move through the air aerodynamically as well. So some really cool careers associated with your understanding of animals, plants, fungus, bacteria, and so on. So applications of this particular kingdom include, you'll see them in the links from the Google worksheet, toxo and cat litter, marine wildlife being killed off, the red tide and harmful algal blooms, the bleaching of the corals due to the greenhouse gases warming up the planet, and how do you swim safely? Is the water actually safe? Right? So I encourage you to look at those as well. I'm going to stop the video here, and I'm going to do one last video with the animal kingdom.